Robbie McIntosh. I was born in Sutton, Surrey. I didn't actually grow up in Sutton, although I grew up nearby. I grew up in a place called Morden, Lower Morden, which is in between Morden and Range Park, so just outside London in Surrey. Born in 1957. My mum played a bit of piano for keep fit classes. My dad would have been a good musician, I think, if he'd taken anything out. He had a great sense of rhythm. Probably one of the greatest armchair drummers in existence. And he listened to a lot of jazz. Not so much trad stuff. He loved Louis Armstrong, trad jazz, but he was more into Benny Goodman, Oscar Peterson. He loved Ray Charles, Django Reinhardt, Artie Shaw, stuff like that. You know, he wasn't mad about the sort of Glenn Miller stuff. He called the long underwear music. They used to call that. That's what he called it anyway. And so my mum listened to a bit of light classicals. But the main, I suppose, one of the biggest influences to me was I had two older sisters, 10 and 8 years older than me. So they obviously were into the Beatles, later on the Kinks, and I mean the Beatles were a bit being a main influence, I suppose. The first album that we got, I think my sister had the Please Please Me album, and then we got With the Beatles and Hard Day's Night. And my oldest sister, who lives near me now on the south coast, she went to see the Beatles in 1964 at Wimbledon Palais. So we were very much a Beatles household, you know. She actually got to meet them, which was great, because when I played with Paul McCartney at Wembley, she came up to the gig and came backstage and said hello to Paul, who had actually shook hands with her in 1964. I think all the girls that weren't screaming their heads off could line up, could go past the bar, and the Beatles were sitting behind the bar at Wimbledon Palais, and of course she would have shaken their hands. And then when Paul saw her in 1990, beginning of 1990, he said, "Oh, I remember you." Of course he didn't really, but you know, he's just like that. So my sister's records had a lot of, quite a bearing on what I grew up getting into. You know, we had mainly singles. The Yardbirds, the two I remember actually was Marv Johnson's You Got What It Takes, and Let's Dance by Chris Montez. All the Beatles singles, all kind of stuff, you know. And then as my sister got older, she got into Cream, Jimi Hendrix, Frank Zappa, so I picked up on that a lot. My sister, also, her eldest sister, had an album by Lightning Hopkins. I remember really getting into that when I was probably 14, 15. So that's kind of how I got into blues. You know, that's more kind of, he was actually from Texas, Lightning Hopkins. So it's more sort of country blues than Chicago or Memphis blues. But I got into that later on as well. You know, Freddie King was one of my idols, Albert King, B.B. King, Otis Rush. And then I had to go back a little bit. I started playing the guitar probably when I was about 9 or 10. My sister had a gut string guitar. I probably ended up playing it more than she did. So and I could play it, and so I played a fair bit. I was copying stuff off Beatles records and what have you. And my mum wanted me to have proper lessons, so I did classical guitar starting at 13 until I was about 18. So I did great. I did grade 5. There wasn't anything before grade 5 on guitar in those days. Grade 5, grade 6, and then grade 8, and I passed all them. I wanted to go to music college, but you needed to be pretty good at playing the piano to get into any of the music colleges. Which of course now it's much easier to go to music college with just do a foundation course and then. But if you wanted to get into those days, if you wanted to get into the Royal College of Music, you'd have to be at least grade 5 on the piano because of all the harmony stuff that you have to do. So I stayed at school anyway until I was in the sixth form. Did a bit of music at school, but mainly sort of music history. I had to do a bit of grade 5, grade theory stuff to progress in the guitar exams. But I never would have made a great classical guitar player. I mean, I loved playing some of the music, but my technique was always swayed towards what I'd started out doing, which was playing pop and rock music. So my thumb was always drifting up. Classical guitar, you've got to keep your thumb behind the second finger. This actually is the most logical way to play a guitar. With it on your left knee, with a foot stand. And my nails were always terrible. My nails are still terrible. I think Segovia said what was the most important thing for classical guitar was to have good nails, and I never did have good nails, and I'd break them playing rugby and stuff because I did all that as well. So, but I still learnt a lot from my right hand picking technique's still pretty good. Maybe it's not the right sound, but I like playing with my fingers. I can finger pick a fair bit. Got into things like a bit of ragtime when I was in my teens. The Stephen Grossman, Blind Blake, Chet Atkins. I really liked. That's a different kind of thing, but Chet Atkins actually played a bit like a classical guitar player. Play with his fingers, a thumb pick and his fingers. There's such a lot to remember, isn't there? All these influences, they all sort of go into the pot and get mixed up and then come out the other end a few years later. But as I got older, I got into from sort of blues and pop. I got in more into a bit of jazz funk. I was never a jazz player. I never will be a jazz player, but I got into listening to the Crusaders, Tom Scott and the LA Express, and then Steely Dan. And then as I started to play more slide guitar, I always loved Little Feat. My older sister told me I was a Little Feat, probably early 70s. So I loved Lau George and Ry Cooder, Bonnie Raitt. I also liked Duane Allman from the Allman Brothers. So it all mixed up into a style. David Lindley was a guitar player I listened to early on, even though he mainly played lap. I mean, I'm very much a bottleneck player. I can't pitch so well, and I can play a bit of lap steel, but I prefer to play bottleneck. And I always like to get in the meat of the notes, like Lau George did, and certainly like David Lindley did, this fantastic sustain. Yeah, I don't know where to go from there really. I mean that's but I'm talking about early influences that kind of, as you get older, I suppose you pick, you're like a sponge when you're a teenager, aren't you? Picking things up. Well, George Harrison, George Harrison to me is one of the greatest slide players. Talking about his pitching, I think possibly helped by the fact that he studied Indian music. It's so accurate, George's slide playing, really, really is, And he didn't really hear him play much slide with the Beatles, More sort of when he got into his solo stuff, he was doing more slide guitar. I did the guitar lessons with a private teacher who taught at the Royal Academy. His name was Michael Lewin. He was I think he taught. When he taught me, he used to teach what they call the junior exhibitioners at the Royal Academy of Music. So he wasn't a full-time teacher of the Royal Academy, but he taught privately, and he lived in a great big house in Wimbledon, off Wimbledon Common. Yeah, Michael Lewin. I mean, he was a fantastic musician, but strictly classical. You know, he couldn't abide anything that wasn't the only music he could kind of tolerate that wasn't classical music was Django Reinhardt, who he really admired. But he turned me on to some lovely music. You know, I remember him playing me the opening to a piece by Delius called Brig Fair, which is an old. Delius was from Yorkshire, you know, originally, although he spent most of his life in France. And I was just spellbound, and from that I got, and I would have been about maybe 14 or 15, and from that I really got into Delius's music and Percy Grainger and all the contemporaries of Delius. Delius was English but lived in France, but he kind of gets lumped in with what they call the French Impressionists, was Debussy and Ravel. And this music's kind of similar, quite pastoral, you know, and from there you can go get into Vaughan Williams and, you know, the folk song, Cecil Sharp folk song collectors, and, you know, quite George Butterworth. He would have been great, wouldn't he, if he'd survived? He got shot in the trenches in the Battle of the Somme. He was only about 25 or something. He was a friend of Vaughan Williams. So I've gone right off the plot, but I listen to a lot of classical music. When I left school, I mean, there was nothing else to do. I took A levels and failed them spectacularly. And so I didn't go to university. I would have gone to university to do biology. I wouldn't have been able to get into music college. The thing is, I stayed at school until sixth form and was pretty good at the sciences, biology. So I applied for a place at university to do biology, and then spectacularly failed my A levels. But I was playing the guitar a lot. It's one of the reasons I failed my A levels. In fact, my biology teacher told my mum and dad to lock my guitar up in a cupboard. That didn't happen. So I was in a band while I was still at school with 3 school friends who had left after their O levels and all out of work. And we were called 70% Proof, and we played. We played stuff by the Who, by Humble Pie, Small Faces, and few things that we'd written. So I was at the school then, but we weren't professional. You know, we took part in a talent competition at the Leather Bottle in Wimbledon. Jack Parnell was one of the judges. We didn't win. Obviously, and so yeah, that was really the first band I was in. 70% Proof, and I still said the bass player sadly passed away now, but I still see those. They're still mates. We were all in the same year at school. And when I left school after my A levels, I got recruited into a band called the Foster Brothers by a couple of brothers who actually went to Rains Park School, but they were a few years above me, 4 and 2 years above me. And I kind of came in as sort of rhythm guitar player, joint lead player, and learnt a hell of a lot from Graham Foster, who was it was his band. He was the main singer and lead guitar player. And I toured with those guys for a bit. Yeah, we did an album with Mike Vernon. Mike Vernon had a studio called Chippy Norton Studios in Chippy Norton, and he was famous, of course, because he produced produced a lot of blues stuff in the late '60s, and produced Fleetwood Mac, of course, the Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. And then the Foster Brothers thing kind of petered out. So we stayed friends, but we didn't. The band kind of didn't exist anymore. It had a brief spell on Elton John's label called Rocket Records. So I sort of I wasn't professional for a while. I went back and worked as a lorry driver for a builder's merchant in the Beverley. Remember the Beverley? Yeah, the Park Suppliers they were called. So I had to load up bricks and cement and sand onto the back of a lorry and go and tip it in someone's garden, that sort of stuff, So I did that for a while, and then I got a call from Chris Thompson, who was the singer with Man from Man's Earth band. And I kind of went and had a play with him, did an audition for his band. He had a band called Filthy McNasty, used to play at the Bridge House in Canning Town. And I just became his guitar player for a while. And then when I was 21, this would have been 1978, we went to Los Angeles to record an album with Richard Perry as producing, who proceeded to sort of fire the band one by one. He fired the drummer, he fired the keyboard player. I managed to hang in there, God knows how, by the skin of my teeth. And was working with, they brought in Rick Marotta on drums, and Nicky Hopkins joined the band as a piano player. I expect Ray remembers Nicky Hopkins. And Bill Payne from Little Feat came to play with us. Michael McDonald from the Doobie Brothers came in and played. And then we toured in 1979 supporting the Doobie Brothers. That was with Chris, Stevie Langer, who was his partner on vocals, bass player called Billy Christian, drummer called Pete Barron, and an American keyboard player, but I can't remember his name. And we toured supporting the Doobie Brothers. That was '79. I can't remember how much money I was earning. It wasn't a hell of a lot because they'd signed publishing deals to fund the tour, all that kind of stuff. And after that, the band kind of fizzled out a little bit. But I stayed with Chris, and we had a band, another band called Chris Thompson and the Islands, and I met Malcolm, who was the bass player from Foster Brothers, was in that band with me, and my old mate Wicks joined the band, a keyboard player. He still plays with Paul McCartney, and a guy called Mick Clues on drums, who I still play with. And then that kind of fizzled out, and it was at that time I actually left because I wanted to get married, and I sort of had enough really. But then I'd kept in touch with a guy called James Honeyman Scott, Jimmy Scott, who I'd met before he joined the Pretenders. He, at that time, when he started to keep in touch, he was in the Pretenders. And he wanted me to maybe join the band as an extra member, just touring. And he phoned me a few times. And he actually phoned me the day before he died. He asked me, he wanted me to go to a gig with him, Ronnie Lane benefit at a place called The Venue in Victoria. And then I found out the next day that he'd passed away. So I kind of left it. I didn't get in touch with the Pretenders, and eventually they got in touch with me. I think somebody mentioned to Chrissy or to Dave Hill, who was the manager, that Jimmy had been in touch with me. So I actually went and did an audition for the Pretenders. I didn't get in at all, sort of through the back door as well. I kind of earned it, And then I did an audition. Chrissy phoned me up a couple of days later and said, "Do you want to join the band?" And then suddenly I was in the Pretenders, 1982. Then we recorded recorded that year, end of that year, and into the next year with Chris Thomas producing. And that was the Learning to Crawl album, which came out actually in beginning of 1980, or end of 1983 it came out, and then we toured in 84. And I stayed in the Pretenders for 5 years. And then I left. And then a couple of years after that, I started doing, about a year after that, I did some sessions for Paul McCartney, and then got asked to join his band. And the reason I left Pretenders, I didn't want to go out on tour for long periods. So I agreed to join McCartney's band as long as we didn't go away for months on end. And we didn't. The longest we were away was probably 3.5 weeks. That was the longest as well. So even America was only like 3 weeks, then home for a couple of weeks, then back out for 3 weeks or so. And then I was in McCartney's band, did 2 world tours with him, 2 live albums, 2 studio albums, and the Unplugged album. And then we were kind of laid off beginning of '94, and then I didn't do any live work really, apart from local stuff. Started off as arena tours, and then moved into stadiums. The first stadium we did was actually in Toronto in December of 1989, and that was the Sky Dome, which was an indoor stadium. So they played baseball in there, but it was indoors. And then we did a few. There weren't that many of those indoor places then. This is 1990. There was a few. There was one in Baton Rouge or New Orleans that was an indoor place. So then we played places like Giant Stadium, the Texas Stadium where the Dallas Cowboys play. Yeah, I mean pretty big gigs. That was started in arenas. So we started touring '89 in Europe, and we did arenas because they weren't anywhere the places that size. Well, they were football grounds and stuff, but we started in arenas in Europe, and then when we went to America, we did arenas for a bit, and then it graduated into stadiums. Big 100,000 people. I mean, it sounds terrible. I mean, it is just another gig. I mean, you're concentrating on playing the right parts and singing the right backing vocals and stuff. I get the most nervous I've ever been is playing at my kid's school, because you're going to see those people again and if you're not very good, if you have a bad night then those people are local and they go, oh God, did you see him the other night? He was awful. Whereas if you're playing to 184,000 people in Rio, which is what we did, got in the Guinness Book of Records, you're never going to see those people again. So, your professional side of you make sure you play all the right notes, and it is fantastic. I mean, I suppose it can go. I don't think it ever went to my head, but it could really easily go to your head. The Rio thing was amazing. But then, they come to see Paul McCartney, not me, but you do feel very much part of it, It was a great moment in the tour in 1993. I mean, I was playing with the Beatles as well. I mean, that was pretty astonishing. Having grown up and loved their music for all those years, that was... And you never really get over that, but obviously you get used to it because you got to be professional. You can't, be. You got to get on with the job. There was a great moment on the '93 tour with Paul where we would, just me and Paul would get on this sort of what do you call it? Like a sort of gantry type, tiny little circular sort of bit of stage with an arm on it, and it it went out all over the top of the audience, just with me and him on it. And the band had started. We did that song "Let Me Roll It" from Band on the Run. It's got that great guitar riff on it. You know, the band are kind of, as the band are doing, boom, doo, 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 you know, the start, and as we're going out of the, and then there's the big stop, and we do the together. I mean, that was amazing, you know. So, you know, the crowd just went berserk as soon as we did that, you know. But that was one of that special moment from my time with, amongst many other special moments playing with Paul. You know, just hanging out with him and Linda was great. 'Cause Linda was lovely. And Blackbird, yeah, I'd learned to play that when I was about, well, when did the album come out? So 68. Probably when I was 11 or 12, or you know, 12, 13, maybe, I don't know. I taught myself to play Blackbird, but there was one bit. And I was going like that, probably because I could, you know what I mean? It's the same thing as going. He played it like that, obviously. So I remember when it was the first session I did with him, actually, we were just talking about it. I sort of played Browne, and I think I played, and he went, "Oh no, I do it like that." Yeah, which makes a lot more sense, you know. I think it's because I wanted to keep that G note in the middle, whereas he. Yeah, so I don't know why I didn't think of that he would have played it like that. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be able to do that stretch because I was playing classical guitar, I suppose. And no, he was great. I loved working with Paul. I really loved it. You know, and you know, arguably the greatest bass player there's ever been. You know, if you listen to his bass playing and you listen to someone like James Jamerson, there's not really much more you need to know, unless you want to get into, you know, playing like Jaco Pastorius or. Do you know what I mean? For pop and rock music, those two just, you know, open and close the book, really. He's fantastic. The band always felt different when he was playing bass. Yeah, because in the band, when Paul was playing piano or guitar, Hamish would play bass. Hamish is a great bass player as well. But so Paul had something else when Paul was playing bass. It just had a different, especially playing the Beatles songs, you know. Yeah. And also the sound of his Hofner was great, you know. From the beginning of '94, I remember Paul phoning me up, and he phoned us each of us up and said, "I'm going to take a break for a while. This is it." And then they did the Beatles anthology thing, and that took a lot of work. So he was immersed in that for a good year or so. Him and George and Ringo doing that. Being interviewed, doing interviews for it and putting the whole thing together. So that probably took a couple of years, I would have thought. And then I guess Linda got sick, so we didn't do anything I didn't do anything with Paul until a charity gig I did with him, which would have been in '97, something like that. I just went back to doing session work. I did get offered a couple of tours, but I didn't really want to do them. Live Aid, '85, yeah, I did that with the Pretenders. Well, I can remember is that we played the songs really fast and the monitors were really loud. If you watch it now, the sound man didn't turn my guitar up very loud anyway. And I got told off for wearing a handkerchief on my head, but it was like 100 degrees. And I kept soaking it in water and putting it in my head because it was the only way to stay cool. And we went on. We probably got there sometime late morning. I remember being in the hotel in Philadelphia when it had started and seeing Status Quo. That was while we were still at the hotel. So we turned up there, I don't know, maybe about midday or something. We were on about 2:30, which equated to about 7:30 in the evening in London. And it was really, really hot. After that, I just hung out with Rupert, our piano player, and probably Malcolm, bass player, and Martin, and the guys from Simple Minds, Charlie Birchall, who I was really good mates with. We just drank beer all day and just watched all the other bands, you know, not all of the other bands. I met the Beach Boys, which is pretty amazing, because Jimmy, my predecessor in the Pretenders, was fairly friendly with Carl Wilson. So we were just quickly introduced to Carl Wilson, Bruce Johnson, and one of the others, but I actually can't remember. I remember meeting Carl Wilson because I loved the Beach Boys as well. Absolutely adore the Beach Boys. And I remember having a little chat with Jeff Bridges, who's a great actor. He was like a sort of compare type. I think he announced a few things. Drunk lots of beer. So we just had a good day, and then we all went back in a coach back to the hotel. I think I had a little chat with the keyboard player from Duran Duran very briefly. He was a nice fella. Yeah. Oh, I remember meeting Duck Dunn was there, and he wanted my autograph for his daughter. I mean, Duck Dunn from Booker T and the MGs asking for my autograph. I got his as well. I've got a few autographs at home. Got Les Paul's autograph. Yeah, that was it really. That was the day. It all happened so quickly, and it was really hot and pretty hectic, you know, because they were turning the band. We only played for 20 minutes, and then they'd set up another band while there was somebody in London playing, and then another band would come on. It was, you know, it sort of toed and froed between London and Philly. But it was a great thing to be a part of, you know, obviously. What I ought to mention, actually, is all the time that I was in the Pretenders, and from probably maybe just before I was in the Pretenders, I was started to do session work for other people. I did, because I'd worked with Tim Freeze-Green with that band Night. We did an album with Richard Perry. Then after that we did in England. We did an album. This was with Chris Thompson, Stevie Lang. We did an album with Tim Freeze-Green producing, and through Tim, I got into working with Talk Talk. So I played on their It's My Life album, which was the first album that Tim produced, and then I did the Colour of Spring album and A Spirit of Eden album. Those three albums I played with Talk Talk. Can't remember exactly. I mean, Spirit of Eden's a bit of a mystery. I'm on it, but I can't tell you where. The Colour of Spring, I'm on quite a lot of it. I didn't play on the single. That's another story. Mark didn't really want to put a single out, but the record company insisted. So David Rhodes played on that. So Talk Talk, I did an album with Roger Daltrey in 1985. I can't remember how that came about. Somebody had heard me playing and wanted me to play on it. I did that with Mark Bazecki and American bass John Siegler from Todd Rundgren's band. I did a couple of little things with Paul Young. I did various pop records with Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley. Marilyn was one thing I did with them. Strawberry Switchblade was another thing I did with them. These are just random sort of singles. I just get in, come in. I did I played on a record that Tim Freeze-Green produced called The Lion Sleeps Tonight. That was my first number one. What else? Oh, God, quite a lot of stuff. Talk Talk being the best, I suppose, I played on a Tears for Fears album called Sowing the Seeds of Love. A couple of tracks on that. That was a little like, that was actually just the same time that I joined McCartney. So that would have been 1988 or 89. I think came out in 89. They actually asked me to go on tour. I got asked to go on tour with Hall & Oates that year. I also got a call to maybe go and do some stuff with The Who, live stuff. This is all in 1989. And I'd also just done an album with a great Scottish songwriter called Kevin McDermott. And he would like me to have gone out on tour as well. So I got all these offers to tours, and the McCartney one obviously was kind of a bit of a no-brainer. You know, they asked me to join the band, so that's what I did. So we've gone back to 1989, McCartney 5 years, left McCartney 94. Went back to doing sessions, really. Yeah, I did that album. It's called Blue Views. We did it at Abbey Road with Paul Carrot. I'd already worked with Paul before that with T-Bone Walk. Bass player produced an album for him, so I'd already worked with Paul, and then I got into that album, which I did with Pino Palladino, Tim Rennick, me, Andy Newmark, Rod Argent on keys, and Paul on keys. That was it. That was the band, which is a great lineup to be in, and that's a really good album. That's when Mo would have interviewed me, 95. I'd set up a little studio at home from the money I made with McCartney. I bought myself a 16-track machine. So I really got into doing my own stuff for a while, sort of later in the 90s, and eventually put out a solo album in 1999. I put 2 albums out, actually. I put out an album with my band, which was... the album's called Emotional Bends. That came out in 1999. I'd also put out an acoustic instrumental album, Finger Picking Thing, which Douglas Adams, who was a friend of mine, you know, the guy that wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He was a friend of mine, and he cajoled me into putting out this acoustic album called Unsung, which you can still get. I mean, you still get all my stuff on Bandcamp. Emotional Bends. And then I did another album called Widescreen, which was for an American label. That would have come out 2002. That's when I did a few tours of Germany with that band, sort of promoting those 2 albums. And then that's when I got back into touring again. I got a phone. I'd done a gig. I'd been working with a guy called Gordon Haskell, singer-songwriter. Great singer-songwriter, Gordon. And we'd done a gig with Norah Jones in Germany, and they'd seen me play. We sort of hung out at the hotel afterwards, and they'd seen me play, and Norah I'd put an album out called Feels Like Home, and the guitar player that played on that didn't want to tour, and I think they'd tried a few people out, and they rang me. So I went over to New York and did a little audition with Norah's band. I did a whole year world tour with Norah Jones's band, which was really good fun. Actually, it was great, really, really good. But after we'd finished the tour, they didn't kind of keep me on a retainer. They had a little bit of recording. I played on 1 track on the next album, and then I got a call from John Mayer's management to go over, because Pino and Steve Jordan, who I knew, had done an album called Continuum with John Mayer, and they wanted another guitar player to go out on tour to play lots of the parts that John couldn't play because he was soloing. So I was 4 years on and off with John Mayer from 2000 Norah was 2004 to 2005, and then 2006 I joined up in John Mayer's band and did that on and off for about 4 years. And they're all great to work for. Norah was great. Norah's band were great. We became very close, just being on tour for a year. And John Mayer, one of the nicest people you could ever want to work for. Don't want for anything in his band, and he's a real sweet guy. And an enormously talented guitar player, writer, songwriter. Who's even better than you think. So after I left John Mayer's band, he kind of laid everybody off. 2010, I went back to doing a bit of session work. Can't tell you what because I can't remember. Did some live work with Sinead O'Connor for a while. Eventually got chucked out of that. I don't think really I was the right. I mean, Sinead was lovely and everything, but I don't think really I was the right guitar player for that. Yeah, I got a call from Gary Wallace, who's the drummer, Tom's MD, and from the management to play with Tom. So I did a couple of years with Tom on and off, but then I didn't want to tour America with him, so I think it was a TV show I couldn't do because I had a local gig that I really wanted to do. So I didn't do that, and then they were going to go to America, but I can't tell you what year. I guess would have been 2016, 17 maybe. And I handed the gig over to somebody else, Simon Johnson, really good guitar player. And Scott McKeon was still is in Tom's band. He's a great young guitar player. So I really enjoyed doing the Tom gig. It was a lot of travelling though for me because I live on the south coast in Dorset. We had to keep meeting up at Luton Airport, which we flew out on a charter. So it was just a bit of a faff, either getting the train up to London and getting a tube, meeting up with the other, and then have to get in a cab up to Luton from London. And then when we got back to Luton, I wouldn't get home till about 6 o'clock in the morning. It just became sort of hard, really. But Tom's amazing. I mean, he didn't sing wrong notes, that bloke. It's unbelievable. It's not Paul Carrack doesn't sing wrong notes either. He's brilliant. I produced an album for a great vocalist actually, who nobody's heard of, but she's absolutely fantastic. A girl called Mim Gray. Mim's one of the best singers I've ever worked with. I put her in the same bracket personally. She's absolutely amazing. And I produced an album for her called Garden of Me. We put it out last year. And I played all the guitar. I actually played most of the bass on it as well. But she's got a bass player who's very good. He played on a couple of tracks, but we tended to work with just her and her husband as a drummer, and me and my keyboard player Steve, who co-produced the album with me. We tended to just kind of arrange the stuff, and Steve's a great keyboard player too. So. I am really lucky. I mean, Paul Carrack, Tom Jones, Norah Jones, anybody called Jones really, Paul McCartney, Roger Daltrey, Paul Young. I did some stuff with Paul Young as well. I knew all those guys from Matt Irving, the accordion player in Lost Beckless, was a very old friend of mine. And Paul I'd met probably in the early 80s. Pretenders and Paul Young had the same tour manager. Our paths crossed, so I used to spend a lot of time at the Workhouse in Old Kent Road, which was Man for Man's studio, because that's where Paul Young did his No Parley album was produced there, and I was always in the Workhouse, so that's where I met Pino actually, because he was in Paul Young's band, of course. So yeah, it all links. It's all a big sort of spider's web. Funnily enough, going back to the early noughties, I got asked to do some Dire Straits gigs, but it was only 3 gigs. We played 2 at the Shepherd's Bush Empire and 1 at Bewley, down in the New Forest, Beaulieu. It should be pronounced, but that's just me. Bewley, and we did. That's when I first met Mark. 2002 that was, and John Ilsley was playing bass. So it was only, and Guy Fletcher was playing keyboard. So there was like only three of Dire Straits that still existed at that time, or still actually would still work together, because Dire Straits stopped being Dire Straits sometime in the 90s, I think. So we did that, and then Mark, I got on really well with Mark actually, and I did a fair bit of promo for him, because he had in his Mark Knopfler band, he's got a guitar player called Richard Bennett, American guitar player from Nashville, great player, lovely man. But when he did promo for the albums, he would get Richard over just to do a couple of radio shows or a little bit in Europe or something. So I used to do it. And I always got on really well with Mark. I saw a few weeks ago actually. I went and played on a record that he was producing for a friend of his. So yeah, I've done various promo with Mark, and I did all the music for the stage show that he wrote for Local Hero. Yeah, and yeah, I love Mark. I mean, he's his touch, his playing, his sound, and I've played some of Mark's guitars, and they're all absolute. He's a great judge of guitars. Every one of his guitars is a real peach. British Grove I've worked at quite a lot. Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, it's a fantastic studio. So you don't want for anything there either. I mean, if you want to record, you can record on a 4-track if you want, with one of the old Abbey Road consoles. They've got the console that Paul McCartney used for Band on the Run in Studio One. They put the drums through that because they got the huge Neve board. It's all Neve stuff. Well, it's actually Neve board in Studio One and API, I think, in Studio Two, where a lot of the old school guys like to use that to mix. Something a bit older, funkier. ATC monitors coming out all surrounded, surround sound, Dolby 7, whatever it's called. Yeah, it's amazing, that place. It really is amazing. You do a nice lunch as well. He's a lovely man. He's played on a couple of albums that I really like. Well, he played with Nancy Griffith for a bit, but he famously produced the first 2 Steve Earle albums and played on them. Guitar Town and Copperhead Road, I think, was the second Steve Earle album. Guitar playing is fantastic. Sound, playing, really, really tasteful. Nice man, Richard. I've only met him a couple of times. I had a drink with him at a hotel after I'd been playing with somebody, and he'd been playing with Mark at Royal Albert Hall, and they were staying at that hotel, something Garden on Kensington High Street. Kensington Garden. After I stopped playing with Tom Jones, I still do gigs with my own band. I've got a great little band with a harmonica player called Peter Hope Evans, who goes right back to the 70s. He was in Medicine Head. Jodie Linscott on percussion, my drummer Paul Beavis, Steve Smith, my keyboard player, Steve Wilson on bass, and another songwriter who's actually joined my band, a girl called Hannah Robinson. So I'm still doing that. I've got a little sort of Peter, Paul and Mary type trio back in Weymouth with Steve, who's my bass player, and a girl called Jess Upton, and we do kind of band songs, Neil Young, and we just play locally really. 2 acoustic guitars, 3 voices, do a bit of Crosby, Stills and Nash. It's great fun. It's one of my favourite gigs really. I've got a little covers band with a guy called Pete Bruntnell who's actually a fantastic singer-songwriter. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I produced an album for a girl called Mim Gray, who's honestly such a fabulous singer. Produced her album. What I have been doing a lot, I've been working a lot with Eric Bibb, who's an American country blues singer. I did Eric's last album, and I've done his new album, which comes out in January 2026. I think he said 1926. Yeah, comes out in 2026. And I'm all over the last album and this new one. We did some recording at Real World Studios, but a lot of it I do at home. They just send me the track, and I'll do 3 or 4 passes on an electric, and maybe some a bit of slide, a bit of resonator guitar playing, slides and that, and they just sort of pick the best of that lot out. So I'm actually going to tour with Eric next year, I think in March. A few gigs earlier on in the year, but made the tours in March, just in the UK. And then I'm going to do some gigs with Paul Carrick as well in April next year. That's planned. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. I spoke to Paul a couple of weeks ago, and if we can fit in the rehearsals. He's done an album in Nashville, Paul, and I think he's got a very great guitar player already in his band, but I think they want to add somebody that plays a bit of slide, just to take the weight off a little bit, just flesh the sound out a little bit. I did a couple of gigs with my old mate Mark Feltham, the harmonica player from 9 Below Zero. We're still close mates. A couple of gigs with Mim, the girl I mentioned, the girl singer Mim Gray. You should check her out. I love the album that I did with her, called Garden of Me. I love playing with Pete Bruntnell, and we do mainly covers. We do occasional couple of duo things where we play some of his songs and some of my songs. His songs are much better than mine. I have to add that, but because he's a proper songwriter, I'm a bit of a chancer. I put out my own albums. I put out an album in here I go again. I'm back in time. 2013, called "Turn Up for the Books." When I got better again, I got ill during the lockdown. I put an album out called SeaWorld, and then another album after that called Fortune's World, which is named after the hospital unit I was in. And they're all on Bandcamp, the RobbieMcIntosh.bandcamp.com. It's a shameless plug. So you can get all that stuff. I mean, you don't mind me saying that, do you? I also play with a band called Held by Trees. The first album I played on was called Solace a few years ago. We did a live from Real World album, an album called Eventide, an EP with a singer called Martin Smith, and the new album's called Hinterland. We do the odd gig around the country. It's great fun, instrumental. It's started off as a kind of tribute to Talk Talk. It's a bit prog rock, all instrumental. Great fun, great band. Yeah, I'm looking forward to playing some live stuff with Eric. I love Eric. I played with Eric years and years ago, but probably before the Norah Jones, John Mayer time. I played on a couple of Eric's albums, and then because I was busy and kind of lost touch, when I got back in touch with Eric, they got me back on playing with him. It's got such another great singer. I'm really lucky with the singers I get to work. Eric got a voice to die for. I suppose he's, if you likened Eric to anything, you'd be probably something like Taj Mahal, kind of country blues, but great singer, fantastic singer, Eric, lovely man. So I think that's pretty much up to date. Yeah. I had acoustic guitars up until I didn't get an electric guitar till I was probably about 16, and it was a Japanese Columbus Les Paul copy. And I remember driving up to FD&H Music, Charing Cross Road, in about 1974 to get a Selmer AP30 amp, and we parked outside the music shop and bunged it in the car. I had that album for that amp for quite a while, and my dad bought me a Gibson, a solid bodied. I don't know how we afforded it. We weren't that a wealthy family, and when I was in that van, the Foster Brothers, it got stolen outside Dingwalls from the van. So my grandfather, who lived with us, lent me 212 quid, and I bought a Fender Telecaster at Rock Bottom in Norwood. Remember that place? And I paid him back like 10 quid a month for however many months, 20, a year and a half or whatever it is. And I used that guitar. I still got it. I did all the sort of earlier Pretenders stuff I did. You know, Middle of the Road and 2,000 Miles, all that stuff was all done on that guitar. Before that, I had bought a Les Paul Standard for 200 quid, a Les Paul Deluxe, sorry, not Standard, Les Paul Deluxe 1970 mini humbuckers, but somebody said it was a gold top, but somebody sanded all the gold off of it. So I had that for a while. I've had that re-golded since. At that time I was using a Marshall 20 watt amp. Before that I had an old AC30 piggyback one. The Marshall 20 I've still got. It's probably my favourite amp. So all the Pretenders stuff, when I was at the Pretenders, I'd got Marshall 100s as well. But actually most of the recording probably with a 20, because they sound so good, those ones. And I had a 70s a 3-bolter Strat Sunburst, which I've still got. Still got all these guitars. What amps? The first tour I did with McCartney, I was using a Mr. Boogie Simulclass big thing with far too many knobs, and I had a Boogie Mark III, once again too many knobs. That's why I like those amps. I just like a volume and a tone, quite honestly. If the amp sounds good, you don't have to do any much more with it, just add a bit of top. And I also had a 410 Bassman, a 59 one. Haven't got that anymore, but I have got a Blackface Deluxe reverb, which I've still got. Still got my Marshall 20. Trying to work out where I'm going with all this. Bought a lot of guitars when I was playing with Paul, but I ended up selling most of the ones that were vintage. You know, I had a 53 all gold Les Paul, and a Les Paul Junior, and a 57 Strat, which I sold. Onto amps, I got into using matchless amps for a while. I had the 30 watt, sort of like a sort of AC30 on steroids, really, the DC30. I used that for a while on my stuff. I used that on the Norah Jones tour. I don't use that anymore. My workhorse amp at the moment is a Tone King Falcon Grande, which is really good because you can run it at half volume, 22 watts full volume, I think. You can run it at half volume, but it's also got a very good attenuator, which you can use just the first 2 notches down. It's all right. It gets a bit squashy after that. I've never really been a fan of attenuators, but it's quite useful if it's sounding good and you just a little bit too loud. You just knock it back a little bit. And my recording amp at home, is either the Marshall 20, but what I do most stuff is a Princeton, which is a good volume for home. 12 watts or whatever they are. 11 watts, isn't it? It's a 6v6. And guitars, what do I use myself? I've got a Strat that a friend of mine called Simon Law made, which has got 3 lipstick pickups in it. I've got an SG with Monty humbuckers in it. I've also still got a few tellies, and one of them's got my signature set of Monty pickups in it, which are interesting because the back pickup sounds like an Esquire, because he's put the front pickup's got very low magnets in it, and he knows, a lot of people know that Esquires sound different than Telecasters because they haven't got another magnet underneath the strings, so they're a bit more open sounding. So the front, on my signature set, the front pickup's got quite low magnets, which are compensated by the windings. So it's not quiet. It's the same volume as the other pickup. So I've been using that. I've got an SG with the Monty's humbucker, the PAFs in it. I still use my Les Paul Deluxe, but that's got Monty mini PAFs. Telecaster. I've got a lovely old D18, Martin D18, which is mahogany. I've got a Collins D2H, which is like a D28 on steroids. Rose got a Collins over there. They're fantastic. They're Uber Martins, I call them. And I've got my Desert Island guitar is a Gibson J50, which was made in 1957, so it's the same age as me. And that's the guitar I take to a desert island, I think. And then I've got 2 fine resophonic resonators. One's a Biscuit Bridge, so it's like a National. The other one's a Spider Bridge, so it's like a Dobro. People use the term Dobro as a sort of generic term for anything that's got a resonator in it. It's actually, as well as I do, the two Spider Bridges and Biscuit Bridges sound so different. And then I've got a very old Spider Bridge guitar made by a company called Angelus, who actually made them for Dobro. So on the headstock it says Angelus for Dobro, and that's a Spider, but it's only got 4 arms, so it's not like full Spider Bridge. It sounds great though. Eric Bibb, I was working with Eric Bibb. He loves that guitar. It's all over the new album, probably on about 3 or 4 tracks. And I play the mainly bottleneck on that, but it's nice enough to play regular as well. I don't have a really high action on any of my guitars for playing slide. I can play slide on pretty much anything. Just taught myself to not press down too hard. You do get, on gigs you sometimes get a dink in the fret where you've gone a bit bonkers, but that's tough. That's pretty much gear wise. My favourite amps, I've got a lovely old Selmer treble and bass 50, which has been modified. That sounds like a Marshall, really. Sounds like a 45 watt, like a Marshall 50. I've got the Deluxe, the Blackface Deluxe. I've got a lovely old Oahu little tweed amp from the 1940s, which is amazing. I've got Keith Richards used to like them apparently. Got my Marshall 20, Lazy J. Oh, that's probably. Do you know Jesse? Jesse Hoff. Yeah, I spoke to Jesse a couple of days ago. He's got a pedal coming out, actually. He's got a pedal coming out. Yeah, because I've got one of his drives, the Cruiser, which is really good. I've got a 335 at home, but it's not mine. It belongs to a friend of mine who never plays it, and he said, why don't you just play it? So I'm still in two minds whether I'm going to buy that or not. It's not an old one, but it's really good. Heavy, but it sounds really good. Got a Flying V. Mine's a 19. I had to date mine because the serial numbers in the 70s are so confusing with Gibsons. They're all over the place. I got a friend of mine a friend of mine's brother has got a shop in Teaneck in New Jersey, and I wanted him to date it. He said, we'll take the scratch plate off and take a picture of the pots. So I did that, and he dated it for me from the pots. It's 76, 77, just before they put that strip of rubber at the bottom to stop it slipping off your leg. And it's the lightest piece of mahogany. I can hold it, but I can grab it by one of the spikes and hold it up like that. And it's a piece, and it's mahogany. Whereas any other guitar like that, it must be from a part of the light part of the tree, I would have thought, But that's a killer. That's a great guitar, that. Oh, blimey, what else? The Collings, the Gibson. Got a Guild 12. I've got a Guild F46, which is the one that George Grun designed for Guild in the 80s. I've got a thing called a Res Electric, which is a biscuit bridge resonator, but with a P90 on the front. Yeah, you can sort of blend the two. I used that with Norah Jones a lot, actually. She liked that guitar. I don't really like playing it that much, but it's got a certain charm. Fine resophonic, but fantastic resonator guitars. I've got a couple of those old amping case Silvertones. The ones you've got an amp built into it's the ugliest guitar ever made for the Sears company by Dan Electro in the early 60s, and horrible to play, but the sound is unbelievable. Those old lipstick pickups, it's something else. No mid really, but like a bit of mid-range, but sort of scooped a little bit and really bassy. They really drive the amp like crazy. They're fantastic things. My other favourite guitars are made by Duesenberg. I've got I've got 5 Duesenbergs. I've got the semi-acoustic one they made called the Carl Carlton, the CC. And my son's got that at the moment. And I've got 2 double cats, one just with a regular trem and the other one with these palm pedals on. So you can do a kind of cod pedal steel with it. I've got flat wounds on that, so it makes it sound even more like a pedal steel. And then I've got this lovely thing that they made called a Julia, which is Dieter, who's the designer, was the head of Duesenberg, and he designs the guitars. He's got a big collection of Wanderer guitars. Wanderer were an Italian company that made the weirdest looking guitars you can possibly imagine in the 1960s. You can pick them up, sort of. They're a few grand now, Wanderers, but some of them look like somebody got a Les Paul, but sawed a big lump out of it. And I'll show you a picture of it later. It's a fantastic guitar. And they do, most of the Duesenbergs have a P90 single coil on the front and a humbucker on the back. And they're really, really lovely guitars to play. I do like my Duesenbergs. The strap with the lipsticks on it was made by my friend Simon Law. And I'm a big fan of Monty's pickups. Monty's used to. It's a guy called Matt Gleason. He used to work for Charlie Chandler years ago, and he originally was in Acton. He's now up in Cheltenham, and his pickups are fabulous. PAFs are fantastic. His Telecaster pickups are fantastic. Makes really good Strat sets. I can't recommend it, and he's a really good bloke as well. Yeah, he's good. So Monty pickups are my sort of go-to at the moment.